A very good morning to all of you. Welcome to this session where we will discuss tech and trade. My name is Cecilia Malmström and I have with me a wonderful panel. To my right here I have Minister Ahmed Zeyoudi from who is Minister of Foreign Trade from the United Arab Emirates. We have Peggy Alford, who is Executive Vice President for Global Sales at PayPal in US. We have Dr. Ngozi, who is the Director General for WTO, Dr. Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala. And we also have Mr. Makhtar Diop, Managing Director for International Finance Corporation. So we will discuss how the technology, how the digital tools can improve, facilitate trade, make it more resilient, and also more accessible. How the digital technology, AI, blockchains, the Internet of Things can improve trade. Before the pandemic, the global trade amounted to more than $21 trillion. We had 1.5 billion shopping online, and that was before the pandemic. That was 30% of the global GDP. Now we see different figures coming, but it's definitely increasing, but still we haven't tapped the full potential of what digital tools and the tech tools can do to facilitate trade. The pandemic forced us all to become more digital or quicker than we maybe had expected. And the digital transformation connect and coordinate global supply chains with consumers. But as I said, there's a lot of untapped potential. So what can we do to accelerate so that the main obstacles get away, so that we overcome the digital cleavages that are there within countries, between big and small countries? How do we get financing? How do we elaborate joint regulation and standards? This is what we're going to discuss with this fantastic panel. And if you want to share, the hashtag is #WEF23, and you're also welcome in the end to put questions. But let me start with you, Dr. Ngozi, if I may. I was listening to a panel yesterday where you said that the future of trade has to be digital, inclusive, and sustainable. So WTO, of course, is so well placed to be the center of global digital development. We know the difficulties, but still WTO plays such an important role. Can you tell us a little bit about what you're doing and how you can develop joint standards to facilitate trade in the world?
Well, thank you very much. You just mentioned the total of global trade, $22 trillion. And, you know, we've always been looking at goods trade, merchandise trade. But what is very interesting is the rate at which digital trade is growing. So goods trade is growing at a decelerating rate. But if you look at digital, especially cross-border data flows and so on, you see phenomenal growth. So just a couple of numbers. In 2005, digitally traded services came to about 1.06 trillion, about $1 trillion. And it was growing at about 7% per annum. Now in 2021, we have about $3.7 trillion. And during the pandemic, because of the demand, it's been growing at 14%. So it's very clear that digital is the future. So that's what I said, why I said that's the way to go. So it's very exciting. But I think one of the things we're excited about is because digital tools also may allow more inclusion in a way, you know, SMEs, women, you know, who can get online and try to become part of national, regional, and global value chains. This provides a means. But I think the issue we're struggling with, we don't set individual standards at the WTO, but we try to develop rules that can underpin the types of trade we have so that we have a more level playing field. And I think part of the issue now is that e-commerce is booming, but we don't have rules that underpin it, like we have for merchandise trade and so on. So that's what we're doing at the WTO. We have an e-commerce agreement that is being negotiated, and the Minister of Trade of the UAE will soon talk about, because they're very active in this. But 87 of our members are working on this. It's a plurilateral agreement, and we hope more and more will join. But 87 is a huge number. We hope that by the end of mid-2024, we can come up with rules that underpin global trade, and that's where we can be helpful on the digital side.
Absolutely, and that links very much into Mr. Diop, because you were telling me you just came from a breakfast with the African Intercontinental Free Trade Agreement development and taking stock on where that is. We can see that many developing countries have the potential for developing digital trade but lack the infrastructure. So how can your organization, how can international organizations help to develop that infrastructure to lift also the developing world to be able to compete in a digital trade market?
I mean, for me, the first word here is collaboration and partnership. Trade is really the area, if you don't partner, if you don't have collaboration, you don't change things. You can be the best infrastructure. If you have all the bureaucracy and you don't have the regulation, good to be moving. You need also innovation, and I'm so glad that we have the Minister of UAE, because I worked a lot with his colleague in charge of artificial intelligence. Actually, it's the first country, only country in the world, I think, which has a Ministry of Artificial Intelligence. But I think it's quite interesting to see what is happening in that country, where they've been developing their logistic part, because a large company working on logistics, using technology, the most advanced technology in those companies, but also from the government side to create an environment. So I'm really excited to hear what the minister will say, because I think it's a good example of what can be done. Third, if we don't do that, we will not be able to contribute on the climate change discussion. Because as Ngozi is often emphasizing, the transaction cost and the energy that will be needed to move goods and to trade, technology can help reduce it significantly. And I see 2 or 3 applications which are immediately necessary for it. More use of blockchain. And we are trying to push us from IFC to have more blockchain in trade financing, because that will be really securing a conversation. We just had a conversation on Africa Free Trade Agreement, and as Ngozi is saying often, multiplicity of jurisdiction, multiplicity of a setup. The representative of UAE was asking about a common custom system in Africa. All those questions, in the meantime, you can address them by putting some blockchain which secures some of the transaction. Second, the registry, which will be helping on the demand side, because if you don't have proper registries, we will not be able to develop. And on the supply side, we have a lot of gain for people who are investing in tech trade. So I think that we are at a time right now where we will be able to make a big progress. And I think that if we don't do that, we will be not helping developing countries, because now more and more people want to have an identification of the source of product and want to also to be able to secure financially transaction.
We will come back to that element of financing and on blockchains, but let me turn to you, Minister Zeyoudi. The United Arab Emirates have been profiling itself as a hub, a regional hub for digital development and digital trade, and also with the ambition to be global eventually. Can you tell us a little bit about your initiatives and how you see them fitting into the picture that we are painting here?
Well, before I start speaking about the Tradetech initiatives, the UAE history with economy has been always linked to the trade. We've been trading in fisheries and pearls, then the oil and gas with the explorations of oils and the new resources that we discovered. And then throughout the last 50 years, we managed to build an infrastructure that is boosting this trade capabilities within the UAE and to the globe. So throughout those transitions, the systematic approach which we talk in the UAE and ensuring that the trade is not disturbed. And this is a very crucial factor here. We don't want any technology which is going to be disturbing the businesses or taking us backward. Moving forward, the technology is going to play a major role in improving the efficiencies of the way that we're running things. We, as a nation, are connected to 400 cities or ports around the world, and those connections means that we want to ensure that things are very efficient to ensure that the commodities that comes to the UAE comes and goes easily. Looking at the custom itself, since the colleagues talking about standard custom process in Africa or wherever we go, it takes time because the infrastructure has to be there, the capability has to be there, the mindset has to be changed as well, because the technology is going to bring more businesses. We're not here to let anyone go or lose his job. The more volume means more jobs are going to be added to the way that we're running things. Coming back to the customs, almost 90% of all customs globally has been done in the last 30 years. So what are the issues in the customs? It's not the custom fees. It's the process, the non-trade barriers. And how we're going to overcome those non-trade barriers? It's by going through the technology. If we're going to continue depending on people, mindset is changing, capabilities are changing, and we're going to stick to the same situation or level of capabilities that we used to have. In the UAE, it's led by private sector or semi-government companies, and it's always the case with any technology that we see globally, and most of the fintech or the technology aspects. Technologies are usually initiated by private sector, and it's the same case in the UAE. Our leading companies, when it comes to infrastructure investments, are the one who is leading those efforts, either DP World or Abu Dhabi Ports, which manage the customs under the supervision of the Federal Custom Union and within the governments. They came up with many of the initiatives which takes us toward that direction. Abu Dhabi Ports, for example, they initiated and developed a program called Advanced Trade and Logistics Platforms. It's a very comprehensive platform where it's reduce all of the processes, apply the AI, the blockchain, most of the latest technology within the system to ensure a smooth operations to the traders and the business people. It eliminates many of the carbon footprint. It saves a lot of money. It enables many of the transactions, 100 millions of transactions. And the other sector as well, DP World has very interesting model that they applied. They launched last year in Davos the DP World Metaverse, where they're ensuring that they're conducting meetings with the partners globally through the Metaverse. They initiated what they call digital twins, a 3D virtual version of physical assets which they can see. They applied and stimulate warehouses and terminal operations through the AI, and they initiated the trade finance, which is one of the main game changer here, where it provides credit insurance to many of the traders and business people who wants to go through the DP World. Speaking about Africa, we as well launched a dedicated platform called Dubai, where it's an e-commerce platform dedicated to Africa, where many of their commodities can come through UAE, and from the UAE it can goes to the world. It's worth to mention here as well, we are the fifth largest exporter from Africa and fifth largest importer of Africa because of those digital and many infrastructure connectivities that we have from the UAE to Africa. This is not only limiting to Africa, but to the whole world, but I'm focusing on Africa because it's a good example and showed the number here. Last thing which I want to mention as well, a few years ago we launched an initiative called World Logistic Passport. It's an initiative where we link the systems that we have with the system, the countries, with the condition that the volume will not be decreased, the revenue of the governments will not go down, and we ensure that we're going to bring more value and more revenue to the governments. We're connecting the South-South, we're connecting and reducing the shipments timeline, and we're going to continue to do so. Moving forward after the pandemic, it's really looking at the whole routes, looking at those technologies, and how can we apply them on a larger scale, and how can we take those capabilities to the global level.
And this work is done through those 400 cities that you are partnering with, and they are spread all over the world?
They're spread wherever we have direct either management or investments. We apply our technologies, we build the capabilities, and we ensure that there is revenue goes to the governments. It's worth to mention that the government's still operating with the same revenue models for the last 20 years. And with the technology, we have to reshuffle. We should not be afraid of taking some risk and applying new technology, because this means we're going to create more revenue and ensure that we really improve the trade and the economies of our countries.
Absolutely. Ms. Alford, PayPal has, of course, been at the forefront of digital payment for decades, running far before the government's change of mind. So how and you support thousands, tens of thousands of SMEs to connect to global markets. If you look into the future, what needs to be done to further reinforce this development, and what are the main obstacles?
Yeah, sure. Well, thank you.
Because you have such a long experience, so I think.
I do, yeah. And, you know, I think we're at a time today when businesses and consumers have an expectation that they're going to be able to buy and sell from the world. And as we've heard, there are still a number of barriers to enable this at scale. However, you know, one of the things that we are seeing is that through technology, small business has been able to participate in global trade at a much higher rate than in the past. In the past, you know, because of the regulatory requirements, because of the capital requirements, the infrastructure needs, it was very difficult for small business to be able to participate. But now with technology, you know, the small businesses are able to work with banks and with service providers, fintech companies, to really be included in this economy of selling to the world. And, you know, we have spent a lot of time really focused on enabling small business through technology. You know, one of the things that gives me a lot of optimism is that today, you know, we at PayPal, we serve businesses and consumers in 200 countries. We enable businesses to be paid in 100 currencies. We enable businesses to withdraw funds in 52 currencies and hold currencies in their PayPal balance, in their PayPal account in 25. And this is only increasing. We spend a lot of effort working with payment companies, with other banks, to enable this to increase. And that is really going to enable trade to happen globally at scale and enable small businesses to participate. In addition to that, you know, there is a real lack of financing for small business. Yeah. And, you know, you see that capital is one of the things that prevents small business from being able to participate. And so we have focused a lot on enabling financing where, you know, in the past it would have been very hard through a bank if you didn't have a history, if you didn't have scale, to be able to get financing to grow your business, which, you know, then therefore you can't buy supplies, you can't, you know, your cash flow suffers. And so if you look at the IFC actually estimates that there is a $5.2 trillion gap between large and small as it relates to, you know, participating in financing. And so our focus has been on enabling finance to small business. The study of our working capital product in the US showed that our product actually reached, 70% of our loans reached counties that had lost 10 or more branches of banks since the financial crisis in 2008. And so, and that underserved communities are getting PayPal working capital at twice the rate as traditional SMB. And this is the key to really enabling small businesses to thrive and to be able to participate at scale. And this is only increasing, not just with PayPal, but with fintech in general.
And how can IFC help overcome that huge gap? How can we mobilize jointly financing and investment that is necessary?
I think the benefit of IFC is that we work on the knowledge, we have the convening power, but also we have access to capital market, so we can bring it together. Let me give you an example. With WTO and Ngozi, we are working now on the data part of it together. We are working under, she has been really launching this idea of us helping countries to get much more data available to be able to do trade financing. And we are collaborating very closely with WTO, and we are launching reports and we write. Actually, I didn't mention it to you, Ngozi. I was just talking to the IMF and wondering if they could even take our initiative and include it in the Article 4 surveillance as a way to increase, accelerate the process.
That would be fantastic.
And I think that will be an opportunity. So we are working very much on the knowledge side and capacity building. But capacity building is a very important part of it, because a lot of things that you have been mentioned are sandbox regulation. People test a regulation because things are moving, and you need to have confidence in government to do some sandbox regulation or to take innovation and regulation. And when the government doesn't have capacities, they are very reluctant in doing that, and they tend to be very conservative on innovation. We are seeing more and more also some link. We are seeing the remittances and transfer being more and more linked to financing SMEs. You see companies which are doing a lot of remittances across country, which have local currency money available in country. We say, oh, why not using that to be able to finance some of the SMEs? So we are seeing much more interaction. Third, you will be surprised, innovation doesn't always come from where you think in this world. And that's why I think that the voice of emerging economies need to be listened very carefully in that space, because actually most of the innovation is coming from emerging economies. It's not coming from very, qualify them, but countries have been there for a longer time. And I think that we are seeing opportunity to leapfrog. So that's what IFC is doing, and we are able to mobilize also capital from the capital market. One of the things that I would like to do more, and I'm working very hard, is to mobilize resources from the GCCs, for instance, where there is a lot of capital available, and helping investing it in places which need investment. But we need what Ngozi is working on every day, to have a trade system. And lastly, is a big message: let's avoid fragmentation. This world is too fragmented, and nobody is benefiting from here. And the poorest country will be the one who are losing from this fragmentation.
Absolutely.
Absolutely, that is trust, and trust can be created through common rules, and that is what you're trying to do in the WTO. What are this plurilateral discussions that are ongoing? They're making good progress, but what are the main obstacles, would you say? Because they are developing countries and developed countries working side by side to develop joint global rules, hopefully one day, at least in some areas. So can you tell us a little bit about that process, and what are the main obstacles so far?
Thanks, Margaret. Before I do that, I just wanted to pick up on what my two brother and sister have said beside me. I think there are two things about digitization, digital and digitization. It appears, I think McKinsey did a survey of CEOs globally and found that 80% of them have been digitizing their supply chains. So, to reduce costs, this is where it is most useful. So there's a lot of progress on the logistics side. But like Makhtar and Peggy have been saying, I think on the financing side, there's much less. And we're finding a lot of gaps for SMEs. And this is where really we need more innovation, particularly for the developing countries. How can we get more SMEs onto platforms? I was just meeting with former colleagues at Standard Chartered Bank, and they are also creating a platform that can help SMEs have access. Because you see, some of the global regulatory standards that you are talking about have inadvertently made it more difficult for developing countries to access finance, and then for SMEs is even more so. So I'm very interested in how we can do more at that level, and whether some of the innovation going on in our countries in fintech, how does PayPal link on to that? Because there's a lot of creativity, but many fintechs, I don't know how they link onto the global, how we can all work together. So that's one set of issues worrying me. But coming to your question, you've hit on an important problem, because we are trying to develop these rules for digital trade. But it is clear that there's a problem. There are two or three sets of problems. First, many developing countries say we are reluctant to join the negotiations for two reasons. One, we just have a digital divide. Physical infrastructure is still not what it should be. And that's why we are also working with IFC, the World Bank, because they've been working hard to try and put some of this physical infrastructure in place. They have access to finance. I mean, we are not a financial organization, but we can transmit the messages. So that's one kind of barrier. I think another one is regulatory. They are also not wanting to join because some of these issues are not easy. We've been able to, the work on the e-commerce negotiations has dealt with things like e-signatures, spam, e-payments, you know, things like that that are fairly easy. But when they are now getting to what do we do about cross-border data flows? Yes. What do we do about, you see a divide. You have US and Japan, on one side who believe in much more open flow, and you have the EU with its system, you have others with other systems. So that's a barrier. What we're trying to do then, how do we bring all this together to create a common approach? Because if we don't, then it will be very difficult to have these rules. So those are some of the challenges. Can we overcome? Yes. The members believe that we can find rules that can help overcome this and give us a common set of rules that can underpin all of that.
Do you want to answer Ngozi's question? Or
on
yes,
fintech,
sure.
I'm very curious. How do you link to the fintechs?
So I could, first of all, I could not agree more with your last point around, the need for countries to work together, for governments to work together, because I think, one of the things that's really been a barrier is this move towards data localization, which every country, and it's understandable. But when you take especially smaller businesses that don't have the sophistication to be able to, sort of work within very fragmented regulations country by country, it really puts a barrier on trade. But I do think that if you can standardize and also have partnership and address the things that countries are worried about as it relates to, sort of the what manifests then into I need everything to be just within my country, no data can travel outside the borders, that can really create a lot of progress towards enabling global trade. To your question, though, I think that there's, especially in markets that are earlier stage, there's a lot of technology now that can help small businesses be able to enable the selling across borders. Things like social selling is extremely popular globally, but especially in markets, where a lot of trade is done through social selling. So being able to plug fintech into social selling to enable small business around the world to be able to reach audiences globally, but also not have to deal with all of the complexity themselves. So you can put the regulation on the larger companies that actually have the infrastructure and the knowledge to be able to navigate, but then enable small business through these platforms, whether it's social selling or whether it's platforms like Shopify or BigCommerce that create shopping capabilities, but also take a lot of the complexity that the small businesses face in terms of like, how would I even set up to be able to sell in multiple currencies? That's a lot of what we focus on. We plug into these platforms that then enable small business to participate in cross-border trade.
That is fascinating. Obviously, we need a lot of partnership between international organizations, business, and governments. And governments, as we know, can be a bit reluctant, and you mentioned it on innovation. What can we ask from politicians to help to set a framework that would facilitate this development?
But first of all, we have to have a global and international buy-in. Without that, we'll not be able to really apply the different ideas that we're talking about. Second thing, let's go. I totally agree with Dr. Ngozi's comments, but let's go to the domestic level, and even with the companies level. Every company and every institutions, they feel that those data are owned by them. It's an asset which they don't want to give free of charge to the other parties. That is in a small scale. What about if it's in a global scale? It's exactly the same. The second thing, which I think it's going to become more and more critical moving forward, we saw how countries cannot be any more dependent on one country or a certain group to supply a certain commodities or certain resources. Same thing here. You cannot continue in one country supplying and providing the same technology. It's a national security. So that's why everyone is still waiting and doing the sandbox regulatory frameworks to ensure that they're doing it the right way and naturally from local base to the international level. We just signed an agreement with the WEF earlier this morning, where we're going to work heavily on Tradetech initiative, where we're going to host an annual event for bringing the governments, private sectors, leaders on the sector with the international organizations to move forward and discuss the best practices and how can we take this to the next level. We're going to be a sandbox nation to apply any technology in the country. We're going to as well assign a special group which we're going to be advocating this idea globally. Coming back to the multilateral aspects and what we can do either regional or globally. The UAE has took very bold decisions in the last 3 years. We're aggressively pursuing comprehensive economic partnership agreements, and digital economy and trade technology is part of this. We do understand still there is no international agreements or understanding on the process, but at least we're putting it on those free trade agreements. So we can have this bilateral engagement and a bilateral understanding until we reach a level where this is going to be taken to a different level and start applying in a larger scale. Dr. Ngozi talked about the e-commerce agreements. It's exactly happening even in local levels. How long we've been doing this e-signatures and those basic stuffs? We've been doing it at least for the last 15 years. Are we doing cross-border, cross-entities data? We just started in the last few years. It's going to take some time until we bring the right approach and the mindsets to everyone when it comes to those global agreements. As a host of MC13, Dr. Ngozi, we're going to work very closely on this topic together. I'm sure, and I really hope that we're going to bring a breakthrough in the discussion during our hosting MC13 next year, inshallah. Thank you.
Thank you.
The UAE has kindly agreed to host the 13th ministerial meeting of the World Trade Organization. So you have all 164 member ministers there, and we'll have some good breakthroughs.
And this is where we break the news. So take good note. This is a scoop. You talk about this from local to international level, and of course you have to build gradually. But blockchains, for instance, one of the problems there is that you need to have systems that are interoperability. They have interoperability, and for that you need joint standards, and that needs to be spread on a global level if it's going to function properly. And here, of course, you do need governance. You do need political decisions. You do need governments to engage in that, as a complement to, of course, what international organizations are doing and business who can show the way forward. As a minister, how do you work with your peers in other countries?
Well, we show the experience and the successful results from our own experience. So we do it in the UAE. We take it on a larger scale within the country, and then we showcase it to the others. Without that, we cannot move forward. That's exactly what we did in many of the custom platforms that we start giving away to many of the colleagues. It's not easy just to go to the market and copy paste whatever the others, because it has to be tailored to your own economic conditions, to the system and how things are run within the country. Capacity building are very crucial, so we should not forget the capacity building, and we should not just think that it's going to be doing it by just applying the system directly. We have to ensure that people are very well trained and they understand the positive consequences of such applying the technology. The third point, which I think is very crucial, we have to be realistic that technology tomorrow there will be a new technology which is going to compete with this, and the technology has to be in a way that it's going to be evolved and accommodating to the new changes and new reforms that's going to happen naturally in those technology. So without those mindsets, we'll not be able to move forward. From the UAE side, we're very open as a nation. We're welcoming the idea, we're welcoming to apply it, and taking it on a larger scale, and we're ready to work with anyone who's interested on that.
Just to say that if anybody has a question to someone in the panel, you can wave, and I think there's a microphone. The gentleman there, please.
Hi, my name is Barry O'Brien. I work with HSBC. Just on the data point, which I fully agree with the views, I guess, the views of the panel in terms of what it's going to take to unlock that, because it's not new, and it is a real barrier, and you've got kind of, a lot more localization of data, et cetera. But just some views in terms of what's got to change for that to become easier.
Easy question, yes.
Very easy question. Yeah, no, I think it's going to have to take these governments coming round the table to try to iron out the differences in approach. And that's what we're trying to do at the WTO. They've done all the easy stuff, like the minister said. So this is now the next step. And it's going to be very difficult. Let's not minimize that. But there's an appetite, a willingness. Even here at the WEF, a group of our members are meeting, to discuss this. So as I said before, you've got the EU and its approach. You've got the US, Japan. You've got emerging market countries. You've got countries with them fragmented,
yes,
and like as Makhtar was saying, approaches. So we are trying to bring them together, and it's going to take them coming to some agreement that will enable everybody to work across borders. So it will take some months, but they're embarking on that journey now. So just wish us luck.
Minister.
I want to compliment what Dr. Ngozi said. It's all about trust. And unfortunately, we don't see the trust is happening now. And as long as the trust is not there, we'll not be able to do any breakthrough here. So we have to ensure that we push for the trust between member states, and then we'll have it.
I agree with that so much. It's the trust factor. That's why they started with easy things, like you said, that hoping to build that trust. If we can all agree on some of the easy things, then maybe when we come to the difficult things. And the capacity building, we've been working with the IFC, with others, to also try to see, with the World Bank, we're also trying to work to build, because part of the lack of trust is that people just, don't understand. They want to understand the regulatory approach of others and how others see these issues. And you need to build capacity. You need to transmit knowledge to do that.
I also think that technology is going to have to play a role, because I think when you talk about data localization or data sharing, in the past it's kind of been an all or nothing. Like we're either open or closed. And as a result, if countries are looking to hold the data within their borders only, all data, then you can't have trade, right? However, I think with technology, you can bifurcate what is shared and not, so that you're only sharing what's needed for the trade and not sharing everything, right? And so when you think about privacy and how that's playing into a lot of regulation and policy, there's a real need to use technology to really figure out how do you minimize data sharing to the point where that trust can be built, but you can still enable trade.
But isn't it a lot also about skills? In order to build that trust, you need to have people who can do it, and not only on the highest level, but it has to trickle down. And what we saw during the pandemic is that so many people suddenly became digital astronauts, but so many people did not. And that cleavage within countries and between generations and between and within countries, of course, is huge. So many people pried from school for 2.5 years without access to computers. And they have, of course, a long gap to catch up. So how can we work with that? Because that fits into the picture as well, to make sure that we have people who can do it.
During the COVID-19, we talked about a lot about vaccine equity, and we worked a lot around this. But on the digital side, it was just shocking.
Yes.
I'm a member of the Broadband Commission. And we worked with Doreen, who's just been elected head of ITU, on a speedboat initiative. But you cannot imagine the divide and the size of the digital divide in the world. And even in the, not only within country, between country, but within country. We see some part of the country, we have access to data, speed thing, and another part. So I think there is an urgent need to close the digital divide. In my conversation here with the head of ITU, and I will have the same conversation with GSMA, we need also to make sure that the telco, you come back to what you both said, trust again. You can see that between the telco and in many countries and the regulator of the public sector, there is a little bit lack of trust. And therefore, and that slows down, in a sense, investment and able to close that digital divide. So we need to have a process also there. And the reason why I say fragmentation is a problem is that in many sectors we have seen it repeated, this break of trust. And that is having a huge impact in the progress that the world made in the last decade in terms of fighting poverty. So I think that if I take a big lessons from this meeting, this WEF, is what can we do to build trust? Because without it, we all say that even things will not move in the right direction.
May I raise just very quickly one problem that people don't talk about, but I think it's going to constitute another obstacle. We are seeing it. As we move into more digitally provided services and trade, many finance ministers are wondering how they are going to raise revenues out of this. So we have another constituency. I'm a former finance minister, so I totally sympathize. We do have within our members another constituency who are holding back because they're seeing they've not, digital taxes are an issue. Their finance ministers are telling them, look, trade is becoming more and more digital, as we talked about. How we don't have the instruments to raise it. So because of that, they're also hanging back from participating. So I just wanted to put that down. That is...
But on the other hand, they can save a lot of money if it's more efficient and more resilient. And
exactly, and they're
what you are trying to do.
But what Dr. Ngozi said is so important. It happens that I also say the same situation in part of my life.
Former finance
minister. Let's take a typical developing countries. Okay. Where do you have, when you have to, a big shock like this one, you have to finance social protection, a vaccine, name it, etc. So you have to go back to bring your budget to balance.
Of course.
So what people will tell you, you need to cut on this. It's easier to say than to do. But where do you have revenue as a Minister of Finance in those countries? Is the telecom sector is the one that are jumping in. And we're reaching a stage where really it's affecting the ability of that sector to invest and close that digital divide. So bringing them around the table and find a way to finance these transitory costs that are so becoming an impediment to building this trust and the integration, I think will be one of the challenges but otherwise, as Ngozi said, they will be taxing, and we will be less and less progress.
What do you say to your finance minister?
That's why we have to start thinking about a new economic and business model for our countries. Yes, we don't want to disturb, but at the same time, we have to ensure that we're coming up with a new innovative way of running the business model. Coming back to the question that you raised on the skills, and this is what we have seen lately as well. Many of the big trade companies and the large corporations, they're acquiring these SMEs. And they're taking the technology and they're merging them. And it has both pros and cons. Yes, it gives them the chance to go and do something else, but at the same time, it monopolizes the whole trade technologies under a few entities. So skills are very important, and we have to ensure that large corporations are supporting the SMEs and encouraging them to come up with more innovative ideas, to do more clustering rather than centralizing things under one or few numbers of companies.
Okay. Do you have any last comments on this trust building, Peggy? I guess by involving so many thousands of companies that you do, in a way, automatically you provide some kind of trust because your system is secure. So can that be scaled up to a broader discussion on how to take that into, to make sure that companies, not only companies, but also governments see that this is actually something we can build upon, that there is trust, the system are working, so we can rely on them and then we can elaborate them on a higher scale.
I think it's what you described, but it's also these public-private partnerships, right? It's technology, it's the banks, it's the governments, the regulators all coming together, really talking about what is each trying to solve for. Revenue is one of the pieces that, that's the reality. And then how do we use these partnerships and technology to enable to be a win-win for everybody at scale?
Absolutely. This is coming to the end. There's always taxes and death. That's the only thing that are certain in life. But apart from this, trust, regulation, partnerships, of course, that's what we can take. Thank you so much, Minister Zeyoudi. Thank you so much, Peggy Alford. Thank you so much, Dr. Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala. And thank you, Makhtar Diop, for helping us to understand this. And I'm sure there will be follow-ups very, very soon. See where we are. Thank you also to the audience.